Let's talk. Your health and wellness podcast.
Welcome back to Let's Talk podcast. And we're talking why 2025 will be your year. Last time we explored the mind and emotional wellness. And today we're going to shift gears a bit to the body, the powerhouse that carries us through our goals and daily lives. Welcome. I'm Dr. Avron Urison, and so great that you've joined us on this podcast today. And joined by my very special guests, Mike Huse, Grant Austin, and Mark Bates. And together we look forward to breaking down with you everything from building strength to optimizing recovery and making it through 2025. And hopefully it will be your fittest year yet. So we're going to take some medical perspectives on that as well, and how to train smarter, avoid injuries, and of course, maximize your physical health. Now's the time to look at it. We're almost at the end of February 2025. So believe it or not, there are 10 months to go of the year. And a lot of work to do on the fitness side. Welcome, guys. Nice to have you in the studio with me.
Thank you, everyone.
Hey, thanks, Avron.
I'd really like to kick off the first section just to unpack and talk about building a strong foundation. And really, there we're talking about strength, mobility, and stability. And I think, Grant, it's probably best to start off with you. I know pretty much you've probably got the most experience out of all of us in terms of building this over a long period of time, and we know it's a marathon and not a sprint. But how would you sort of advise our listeners in terms of points to take, ideas, in terms of strength, mobility, and stability training and building a strong foundation?
Everyone, I think the first thing is consistency. So I'm 59 years old. I've been training with something since about the age of 4. And it's really been a part of my life. And it's something I just do every day. If I don't do it, then I feel like I've missed out. And I know that's a fairly sort of a lucky or fortunate position to be in, where I've made it part of my life. A lot of people haven't been able to do that. And obviously I had strong influences from my family that got me into health and fitness and kept me going. So, obviously when you are younger, you train your ego a lot. And it's about heavy weights, the heaviest you can push and that kind of thing. And a lot of people tend to injure themselves in their early years, squatting as heavy as they can, deadlifting as heavy as they can, that kind of thing. And my advice is for you for people to basically take it at a relatively moderate pace. Obviously, you have to warm up really well. You have to stretch and stuff like that to make sure that your joints and your ligaments and tendons and things like that don't take strain. And I think if you vary up your training as well, ranging from training with heavy weights, cheating a little bit, training with lighter weights, doing higher reps and that, but you kind of mix it up. And I found that listening to my body helps me a lot. So I don't necessarily have like a set routine when I go into the gym, because you might come into the gym and you find that a machine's busy, someone else is using that. So obviously having a decent knowledge of what you can do helps you a lot. And then I found that, for my purposes, having a 3-way split, which for me has always been chest and tricep, back and bicep, and shoulders and legs, has worked for me. And I select exercises around that. Mobility is obviously really important as well. So, stretching, explosive exercises, balance, all plays a role. And, you can work on things like your balance. It's going to sound like a really funny thing to say, but if I'm having a shower, I'll stand on one leg for half the time. When I'm drying my feet, I'll stand on one leg and try and balance and that kind of thing. So you can build those little things into your life on a daily basis. It doesn't always have to be at the gym. You can actually build those in. And then, we're all guilty of not warming up. We're all guilty of not stretching as much as we should. But stretching really adds a lot of value, and it actually builds strength as well. So, I can highly recommend stretching, and I'll come back to what I said earlier on, and that is really just consistency. Even if you've had a bad day or you wake up and you're not feeling great, just get to the gym because you don't want to break that habit. And that's how I've done it. I think in my 54 or 53 odd years that I've exercised, I think if I've taken it off in total 1 year in that entire time, it's a lot. And it might sound like a chore to some people, but once you get into it, it's actually really just becomes part of your life.
Yeah, I guess I want to emphasize this point, and I think I've said it in quite a number of our shows, that the research is actually showing undoubtedly that the two most important areas that people should work on for longevity, without a doubt, and this surpasses it by at least 20 times ahead of anything else you can do, is one, working on your VO2 max, that's cardio, and we're not really talking about that necessarily in the show. But the second thing is muscle strength. Now, it would potentially say, okay, I can understand the VO2 max, cardio, etc., but really, does muscle strength, if I work on it, is that going to be something that's going to extend my longevity and health span? And the research that's coming out now, certainly in the papers that I've been reading, certainly shows that. Mark, I see you nodding your head there. Have you seen that as well?
No, it's just piggybacking on, like people always think cardio is like, the key to longevity, but often muscle is, and we've spoken about this before, so we're not going to bang on about it too much, but muscle mass is just so good for longevity in your older years, through bone density, through strengthening your ligaments, to just being able to carry yourself better, and, me being in my 40s now, you kind of realize that you're not really training for aesthetics anymore. You're really actually training for later life. And it's exactly true what Grant says with regards to mobility and stretching. It's also become a big part of my routines. And you're so right, Grant. I mean, for those of us that work in the gyms, we see people walk through the turnstiles straight onto the floor and they're lifting weights. You know what I mean? There isn't even a thought of a stretch or a nothing. I mean, my stretch routine in the morning is 20 to 25 minutes. And the thing that I wanted to touch into is also how stretching's changed. Like, stretching used to be just bend down, touch your toes, a couple of shoulder opens and, all that type of thing. But it's completely, the whole concept of stretching has become a lot more dynamic. How people can work actual stretching flows into their routine. So it's no longer a case of walking into the gym and touching your toes and flapping your arms around. It's understanding the difference between stretching and mobility. So stretching is literally just taking a muscle or a ligament and holding it in that position and trying to stretch it out a little bit. But what it eventually does, it just releases back. Mobility is taking that ligament or that joint through its full range of motion and maximizing its potential. So now, if you are then following a good muscular program, a good muscle growth program, you've got to see the benefits of those two, because you could be the strongest person in the world, but if your ligaments are weak, there's nothing you can do with it. So if you really segue the two and get them working together, a good mobility and stretching session 2 to 3 times a week will change the game completely. Myself and Mike were talking about it 2 days ago. I mean, we're both into combat sports, and Mike was just saying how he's reintroduced mobility into his workouts, and just within, I think it was 2 weeks, Mark, you said your kicks were feeling so much higher, your hips were feeling, so,
So Mark, so just explain to me, because my listeners are probably, I can understand strengthening, right, and stability maybe. And our listeners, what does mobility mean in terms of the whole process and what I should be doing in terms of building a strong foundation? What exercise, is that just general exercise or specific exercises?
Well, I mean,
around the mobility.
Again, it's when I say that it's not just touching your toes. I mean, there are specific, movements that you would do. Like there's that one that they call the greatest stretch in the world, where you come from a standing position, you bend down, you stretch your hamstrings, you walk forward into a push-up position, you touch your shoulders, you open up your chest. So it obviously takes a bit of an educated person to coach you into how to doing these things. But in saying that, there is a plethora of information out there on YouTube, on Instagram. I mean, if you just punched in mobility into YouTube right now, you would be opened up to an entire world. You know what I mean? So as is with everything, it takes a little bit of time to educate yourself, and start understanding what it is. But at basal level, it really is just maximizing the range of motion of a joint or a ligament. And that's basically what mobility is, so
Right.
it really, like, especially around our hips, and the more sedentary we get, the more we suffer, because I know for myself, I carry most of my tension in my lower back and my hips. If I don't stretch 3 to 4 times a week, I try to do it every day, but life happens. If I don't, I can feel by that Sunday I'm stiff as a board. So it really is just experimenting and not ignoring it, like Grant alluded to. It's so important. And I mean,
Yes.
especially for those of us getting on later in life, as much as lifting weights is good for us, and running and all that type of stuff, getting outdoors and all that, I really, really do believe quite strongly in this whole mobility and stretching movement. I really
Mark,
do.
you wanted to give some input onto that. What has your experience been?
So yeah, I mean, I'd probably echoing what Mark and Grant said, but I think from my point of view, it more comes down to quality of life. So I think that we're living in an age now where people will have you, in perfect world, health looks like a 4-hour job a day. Because, if you talked about health 20, 30 years ago, it was get into the gym for 30, 40 minutes and like you're pretty healthy. Like you've achieved a lot. Now today, it's like you should be sauning once a day and ice plunging once a day, and you should be training for 45 minutes and stretching for 20 minutes twice a day and doing mobility. And it's like, if you really want to like break it down, that's not something that's a realistic expectation for the average person. And I would say even for myself, Mark and Grant, we probably don't hit all three of those things kind of every day. Barely. I mean, I've barely ever ice bathed in my life, and I don't do cold stuff, and I don't sauna. But if I got the chance to, I would in a perfect world. So I think from my point of view, what needs to happen is you need to work these things into something that's manageable for you. And it has to work for you every single day. And it doesn't mean you can't do things like mobility. Like mobility is, I think, extremely important, but it should be part of your workout. So if you're going into the gym and you're going to train legs today, then you should be doing lower body mobility before you do legs. And that's a 10, 15 minute thing that you incorporate into your warm up, and then you go on and do your leg session. If you're someone that wants to take fitness extra, seriously, then sure, you can go and do your own mobility session for 10, 20 minutes a day and your workout. But that's a perfect world. I think for most people, that's not going to really work out like that. So for me, I try and incorporate mobility into what I'm going to do on the day. And that makes it manageable for me. I love gym, but I also don't like spending 2 hours in the gym. I enjoy doing the things that I get to do from being strong in the gym. I like doing martial arts, and I like playing paddle, and I like doing, activities that require a bit of fitness, but that's the fun stuff. The gym is get strong and get fit to do the fun stuff. So for me, when I was younger, as Grant said, you wanted to lift and you be in the gym for 2 hours, you want to look a certain way, and then you get to a point and you're like, and this is not to be funny, but like guys that look really good and are really muscular, it's usually for guys. Like you get most of your compliments from guys. Like girls don't come along and say, well, you're so big and massive, this looks so good. It's like, it's a weird thing that we do because we enjoy being really big, but like the compliments we get are mostly from guys. And it's when you're fit and healthy and lean, girls are like, oh, you look really nice. So if the aesthetic goal of yours is, hey, I'm doing this because I want the other gender to find me attractive, then, lean and fit is probably all you need to do. Most women on the planet would probably choose Ronaldo over, a big bodybuilder. But so I think that you've got to decide, what are you in the gym for? Like, are you in the gym because you want to do stuff outside of the gym? And if that's what you require, then yeah, mobility is important and fitness is important to go do the fun stuff. Or are you in the gym because you want to look really good? And then yes, like the mobility is important, but it's not going to be as important outside of the quality of life improvements that you'll have from doing mobility.
Sure.
Can I
Look,
jump
from
in
my
quickly?
medical side, coming on this show, certainly I'm trying to solve for health span and lifespan. And that's where sustainability and doing it and enjoying it, Mark, I think you pinpointed. Sorry, Mark, I interrupted you there.
Yeah, I just want to, because we were talking about foundation stuff, and I
Yes.
think Mike hit the nail on the head. I think the foundation comes from what you want to achieve. You know what I mean? So if you can make up your mind that, okay, cool, I'm doing this because I want to look aesthetically good, then that's your foundation and you'll build from there. If you're doing it for a sport specific, then you already know that that's your foundation. And then from there, everything can segue. If you're doing it for, just for general health and wellness, again. So I think that first building block, and we alluded to this in one of our first podcasts, was know what you want from your fitness routine. Because I think that's also very important.
What your why is, right?
Yeah. Because you'll get pulled in all different kinds of directions. So
Exactly.
I think that's you want from your fitness journey is your first block of the foundation.
So I think guys, we've established, obviously a strong foundation, strength, mobility, stability, and it's a long-term story. It's not just a few weeks, and sort of what has to be your overall overriding strategy. I'd like to move it then into quite an interesting area, which I thought may be quite interesting to discuss and unpack: the science of recovery, sleep, stress, and muscle growth. And I think a lot of people are going out in the gyms, they're exercising, they're working on their strength and their stability in various areas, but they don't really, and I think we touched a bit on this, but I just want to unpack it a bit more. The sleep, stress, and muscle growth part. Why is recovery important? What is the science around it? And how does that affect our overall muscle growth and performance? Grant, what are your thoughts on that?
So I mentioned this in a previous podcast where I had a apnea, and I didn't sleep well. I would have like 67 apnea events an hour kind of a thing. And I got myself one of those CPAP machines that absolutely changed my life. I went from sleeping sometimes in a weekend, I'd sleep 14 hours and I'd still be tired. And when I got the machine, I couldn't sleep more than about 5 hours and I'd be wide awake. And what I found in about a 3-week period, and this sounds insane, I picked up about 7 kilograms of good quality muscle. So my sleep and recovery had been holding me back from making those kind of a gains. So sleep is insanely important, and not just enough sleep, but also when you sleep. A good friend of mine who runs 24 different businesses was working mostly at night because he found he was interrupted too much. So he would work until, say, 3-4 in the morning, and then he would sleep part of his day kind of a thing, and he was feeling worse and worse, and he went to his doctor, and the doctor said, your cortisol levels are insane. I mean, there's a real problem here. Do you sleep? And he said, yes, I do sleep. So if you don't sleep, we basically designed to go to sleep when the sun goes down and wake up when the sun comes up kind of a thing. A lot of people don't realize that. So sleep is exceptionally important for recovery. I have obviously first-hand experience of that, and it made a massive difference to me.
I mean, I've picked up a study here that I see that insufficient sleep can reduce muscle strength the following day by as much as 20%. Have you guys found that in practice?
Yeah, I can definitely 100% get on board with that.
I would say it depends on the person. I think I think there's a lot of papers out there that will give you as an example, I like to use as an example when it comes to percentage studies. It's like, if I broke my hips today, most doctors would say, there's a really good chance that I'm not going to have full walking or running capabilities again. And the reason that I find that they say this is because most people that break their hips are elderly people. So they give you the worst percentage that it can be. So I think when you look at something like up to 20%, it's like, yeah, you could lose up to 20% if you weren't a high muscular, high testosterone male. In probably most males that, gym have a high amount of muscle mass, you're going to notice a difference, but it's not going to be as severe as someone that's not carrying a lot of muscle mass. That might be the upper echelon of the difference, like the 20%. But I mean, look, I think sleep is, as Grant said, and I 100% believe him when he says he put on 7 kilos in 3 weeks. That's a lot of weight. That's a lot of muscle mass to put on. But if you're not sleeping and you're doing all the other things right, like, you're still going to grow. It's still going to happen because that's the biological effect of eating enough protein and taking whatever supplements you're taking and training. But you could be stunting that exponentially by just not getting REM stage 2, which is recovery. And there's so many scientific kind of, let me say, proven bodybuilding cases that are coming through now are bodybuilders from like the 80s and 90s that train 3 times a week. They trained a Monday, they rested a full day. They trained a Wednesday, they rested a full day. They trained a Friday, and they rested 2 days. They had very intense sessions, but they were some of the biggest guys around at that time. And this is a time where there wasn't even that many performance-enhancing drugs. So like you were kind of just relying on the best stuff that you can do. So for me, I think that that's the best basis to look at where men and women got the most results is looking in past experiences, not now, because now you can add 10, 20, 30 more things that we have because of modern medicine and science and all that kind of stuff that can, further push the boundaries of what the human body's capable of. But if you look at what they had 30, 40 years ago, when they didn't really have anything and people were, growing and gaining muscle mass and bigger than the average person walking around, those are the things that you should look at. And sleep was a huge part of that. And recovery was just a huge part of that. So the body does need recovery. When you go to the gym, the body doesn't know what you're doing. You're just causing stress. So you're going and creating a stressful event for your body. Your body doesn't know what's happening. It just understands it needs to recover afterwards. Now, if you go and do that 6 times a week and every day is intense, how do you expect your body to take the time to grow the muscle that or to repair the damaged muscle that you've done in those 6 days? 1 day is not enough. So I think for me, and I'm sure we're going to cover this a little later on, I've realized that later in life, less is actually more, especially when it comes to your body, because someone said to me the other day, they said, it really, really interested me. They said, if long training sessions were the way to go, right? If training in the gym for 2 hours was good for your body and every day, why don't we train 4 hours, 6 hours, 18 hours? Why aren't we growing exponentially then? It's because more isn't better for the body. The body has to recover, and an hour of intense training is pretty much all the body can handle if you do it right. And then you need recovery after that. And sleep is a big part of that.
Mark, I found that very fascinating. I think that's a great point for our listeners, because they may be feeling overwhelmed by saying, I've got to go out and kill myself every day in terms of training. But the point about actually having rest days, I think is very important. Grant, what are your thoughts on... Yeah, sure.
Sorry, Avron, just before we continue, I just want to touch on one thing, because I don't want to confuse the listener here. We're talking about building muscle now, and that's, a 1 hour intense amount of weightlifting. If there's a listener out there that's like, I want to lose weight, right? That means that we've got to create a calorie burn every day. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you should only train 3 days a week, because what your goal then is to increase the amount of calories you burn in the day. So more frequent training is going to be better in a situation where you want to minimize the amount of body weight that you're carrying, because obviously the more activity you have on a daily basis, the more calories you burn, the less you take in, and the more weight you can lose. So it's very important to understand the distinction. Growing requires a decent amount of rest, but losing weight requires you to be active, and it doesn't mean that strength work is necessarily what you have to do, although scientifically proven strength work is the most amount of calories that you can burn. Funnily enough, even compared when you do cardio and strength training, pure strength training still comes out ahead if you do the same amount of time as you would for strength and cardio. So I think that that's an important thing for the listener, is don't believe that it's going to lose weight. You need to walk in the gym and do cardio. Actually, you need to walk in the gym and do weights and do a decent amount of them, but you can keep the intensity to a more moderate kind of regime than if you're trying to build muscle and going to be taking a long rest recovery after that.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. And I think that's important differential and to understand. But I think also, and Grant, I'd like your comments on this, or views, stress, right? I mean, we're probably in 2025, probably one of the most stressful times we're experiencing, for various reasons, financial, social, etc., etc. Stress can significantly impede one's body ability to recover, and I suppose individuals have to look, is it the chicken and egg situation? Is it, in other words, if you don't exercise, you become more stressed, and then the more stressed you are, the less you exercise. How do you sort of break out of that? Any ideas?
Everyone, so I've got quite strong feelings on this. A lot of times people will, I'll give you an example. So let's say you have 10 problems that you have to deal with in a day, and 7 of them are you can't solve them today, but 3 you can. And if you focus on the 7 that you can't solve and you leave the 3 that you can, your problem ratio goes up to 13 the next day. It doesn't change. So you have to focus on the stuff that you can achieve and get done. And that's how I deal with stress. I literally I've got a to-do list that's probably about 160 items long. And that sounds like a lot, but this is something that's like been over time, where there's something I want to do. It's an idea I've got. It's a concept that I want to launch or something like that. But I'll push all those things to the back burner. And even if something is particularly important to get done, but I cannot get it done today, I just completely ignore that for the day. Obviously determine that in the morning. So that is a way that I find that helps me to deal with stress. Otherwise you end up spinning your wheels on the problem that you can't solve, and the ones that you can solve become more and more and more. And then again, just making your health routine an absolute part of your day, because when you're in the gym, you don't have those worries on you. There's people around you, checking to people, you're exercising, those kind of things. So it's a bit of a diversion from your day. So I find that training is a great stress release, because there's nothing else that you've allocated in that day. And then you find people as well that say, well, I don't have time to exercise. And I say to them, well, if your wife was arriving at the airport at 3 o'clock on Friday, what would you do? Well, I'd be there at 3 o'clock on Friday. Well, how did you make that time? Well, I put it in my diary. Well, do that with your exercise. Allocate that time every day. And if something else tries to encroach on that, just that time is blocked off in your diary. You have to block off that time for yourself. And that's how you keep your stress in. For me, that's how I keep my stress levels down.
Yeah, that's good.
Let's move on to nutrition for performance and vitality, right? And I know we've had some shows on this, but this is about our general segue from a physical perspective into 2025. And I want to keep this at a reasonably high level, because we are going to have further shows that we're really going to deep and unpack this. But, I have people as just a medical practitioner ask me all the time, what type of diet should we be eating? But I want to put this specifically focus on for muscle building and performance. Where are we in 2025 with this? How different diets impact training and results? High carb versus low carb diets, high protein versus low protein. Any one of my guests want to try and tackle this or take a first stab at it? Because it's a minefield, this area. But Mark, go for it. We want a high level in terms of what are we going to advise our listeners as they move through into 2025 from a dietary perspective?
Simplify.
That's it.
Literally simplify. And this is, before I move on, I want to pull back to what we were talking about, stress levels as well. This kind of plugs into food as well. Being able to unplug from all the stresses, because a lot of our stresses are literally the machines that we're actually talking into right now. Our cell phones, our laptop. We are so hyper connected to the world. It is incredibly important to find time to just push away and unplug from things. I think it's really important. Like, go sit outside in the sun and read a book. Go take your dog for a walk with no devices. Like, I think that is super important as well. Something I'm trying to be more conscious of. When I get home from work, I literally I'll take care of what I need to take care of, and then it's done. And it's like Grant said, if it happens after 7 o'clock in the evening, probably not that important. I can pick it up in the morning. Obviously, check if it's not from family or some serious friends. But if it's work related or something else that's not serious, it's nothing that can't wait for the morning. Because I think we're so plugged into our worlds that we hyper fixated onto it, and it sends our stress levels through the roof. And I think it's the same thing with food. Because we're so plugged in, we get so hyper obsessed with what an athlete's eating, or what a rock star is eating, or the celebrities we follow, that we must follow their diets. But what we don't realize is that they've got an army of nutritionists behind them. They've got personal trainers, that are fueling them throughout the day, training them 6 times a week, all this type of stuff. So it really is as simple as calories in, calories out, moving more, being more active in your life. For me, it is literally that simple. And educating yourself on calories and macros. Like if you can get a basal understanding of what calories and macros are, your proteins, your carbs, and your fats and where they come from, you can build your own little diet. And you don't need to have, salmon from the Himalayas and, blessed lettuce from the monks in Tibet. You know what I mean? You don't have to do that. Like Mike has one of the most I've ever seen, and it sounds bloody delicious. I want to eat that every day. This man eats steak and egg wraps all day. It's amazing. Why wouldn't you want to eat that? And my great physique. I was standing next to him on the we were offloading. I was very embarrassed. But so it really is finding what works in your day, what's real, what you can afford is another one, because these meals that people try to sell you are ridiculously expensive and unsustainable. And what happens, you buy into it, do it for like 4 weeks, you completely fall off the wagon. Then next thing you know, you're neck deep in M&Ms and chips and Coke and whatever again. And that you lost, you just back on. So simplify, educate yourself, and find something that's sustainable. Those are my 3 golden rules when it comes to me.
I'd just like to put back a point there on what you said about simplify, Mark, and I really like that. And for the past 20 years, I possibly have read 3 books, and generally I would only read books that were business orientated and nonfiction, that kind of thing. I was almost proud of the fact that I only read nonfiction. And then in December, I was away with my family, and I had like 10 days of downtime. And the place that we were staying at had a book rack. And I took a book and I read it. And I read it in a day. Since the 27th of December, I've read, I think, 25 books. Now, the difference between reading a book and watching a movie is that when you're watching a movie, it is outside of your mind. You're a spectator of something outside of your mind. And that's your phone, that's your TV, that's all those things. When you're reading a book, it's inside your mind. So it forces your mind to create its own. Like somebody's explaining a scene, like a hitman that's going to shoot someone, and they tell you about his gun, they tell you about the surroundings that he's in, they tell you what he's wearing, they tell you what the darkness of the night and the light that's shining, and all of that occurs inside your mind. And I found that having gotten back into reading is incredibly valuable to me. Even though I'm reading stuff that is fiction, it really, really expands your ability to comprehend and your ability to visualize and your ability to even think and broaden basically how you think. You're just a spectator watching your screen. That's all you are, but with a book, it's inside your mind that it happens. And I found that very valuable.
I mean, Grant, I was already starting to get the picture of your hitman there just from that short description. What gun he was using, the dot or the nut.
So you're suggesting that that they sort of tackle the reading to try and get answers on this as well?
I think that definitely, Doc. You need to do your own research and that kind of thing. We're so glued to our screens, our phones, our TVs, and that kind of thing. And it's the easiest thing because it's constantly delivering content to you. And a lot of it's not content that you actually need. It's some nonsense that's important to somebody else. So take a step back, get back into reading, get back into your mind being the thing that processes those things. And that's been a big thing for me. It's really, it's made a big difference to all kinds of things. Stress levels, imagination, ability to comprehend, ability to think clearly, etc., etc. I really have enjoyed it.
Fantastic. I think that's brilliant advice for our listeners. Mark, your thoughts on diet or high-level input to our listeners in terms of how they should be focusing on their dietary input for 2025?
Yeah. Before I jump in, and this is quite a funny thing. So I visited Grant about a month and a half ago, and he asked me, do you read? And I said, Grant, I love reading medical stuff and research papers, and that's about the best. And he handed me a book called Jack Reacher, and he's like, you must read this. I promise you'll enjoy it. You'll get into reading it. And I walked out the house, I got in the car, and I'm like, because because Grant's given it to me. Like, I have to read this book now because you can ask me about it at some point. So I'm like, I don't actually read this book. And I didn't do it for like a while. I kind of put it off. I'm going to read this book. I'm not going to open it up. So I really didn't enjoy reading. And last weekend, we went away for Valentine's Day. We went somewhere in the mountains. And we were all like packing up. My girlfriend's like, why'd you take this book? Because there's nothing up there. She's like, I'm like, I don't really want to take the book. I'm not going to read. She's like, just take it anyway. So she packed it. So it was the Saturday night I got into reading it. And by Sunday morning, like 2 a.m., she was like, why are you still up? And I was sitting there halfway through this freaking book, thinking to myself, how ridiculous is it that I'm sitting reading a fiction book at 2 a.m. in the morning? And again, it just leans into exactly what Mark and Grant said. It's you're watching cinema every time you turn an electronic device on versus creating things with your mind when you're reading something. And I'm 36 years old and I've never truly gotten into a fiction book where I've had to create stuff. So for me, it's a very new thing. And I know a lot of people that don't take reading seriously, and I can still say I don't take reading seriously, but it was a very, very interesting experience for me and a very calming experience to just sit and create cinema for myself in my own head when it wasn't being fed to me. And like, I can understand now why people say that reading is calming and it's a de-stress. So, again, I'm just piggybacking on, I agree. I really think that if you've never read and you don't believe in it, I promise you're not alone. I was right with you up until about a month and a half ago. And in fact, closer to more like a week ago, when I opened a fiction book for probably the first time in my life outside of school that I had to read books to pass tests. And I thoroughly enjoyed and was surprised at what that did for me. So yeah, it was really good.
And I love that I have a group of fitness gurus here, and I wouldn't believe it on our podcast show that they're all advising the listeners to read. So I think you guys are right. I think absolutely in today's environment, it de-stresses, it educates you, and takes time out, and probably puts you in a better mind space for when you get back into the training, the gyms, etc.
You need to step back from digital to some extent. I mean, digital is insanely important in our lives and that kind of thing. But you need to step back from digital because you're getting fed stuff that they want you to be fed. Whereas if you're choosing what you want to look at and read and research and that kind of thing, and that's in every area of your life, that's your conscious decision to go down that path. I mean, that's more books for you, Mark.
Yes, thanks, Grant.
Grant,
everyone, just to touch on.
Mark, 1 second. Grant, you didn't tell Mark about the Jack Reacher test that's going to get emailed to him next week, huh?
But just to jump into the nutrition, and again, Mark really covered a really, really big portion when he spoke about simplifying, do your own research. That's really important. Another important thing I think people need to understand, and it's a really harsh truth to go through, and I'll give you an explanation on why I say what I say, is we're not all built the same. Okay, we're just not. And yes, there is the law of thermodynamics, and you burn more calories than you put in, you lose weight. You take more calories than you put out, you'll gain weight. And that's a great base understanding of what nutrition can do for you. But there are people that respond just better to high carb diets. There are people that are naturally muscular people and build muscle easier than myself and anyone on this panel. And to use Grant as an example, because I've kind of worked for him for 4 years now, and I've seen the way he eats, and I promise you, I've probably never seen a bodybuilder health meal on his plate. He loves eating. He eats food. There's chips every time he has something from a restaurant, and he's probably the best shaped 59-year-old that I've ever seen in my life. So you've got to take things with a pinch of salt. If you're someone that struggles to put on weight, then the 3,000 calorie diet that the internet tells you is what you need to gain weight probably is more like 3,500 to 3,600 calories, because you've just been a naturally thin guy your whole life. So you've got to kind of understand your own body at first, and we all know how we are. Like, I know people that I could speak to today that says, if I eat a little badly for a week, I gain a few kilos. Well, then guess what? Unfortunately, you're predisposed to gaining weight easily. And your diet's probably going to be less calories than the normal person's diet to lose weight. So those are important things to understand. And that just, ties back into Mark saying, educate yourself, but first understand yourself, understand who you are, what you've always been predisposed to be. Were you growing up, were you a naturally thin guy or girl? Were you a naturally heavier guy or girl? Were you a muscular? Weren't you muscular? Those are all important things, because if you're someone that holds a lot of muscle mass, then weight maintenance is way easier for you, because it's like having more gears. It's like having more furnaces in the factory. The more muscle you have, the more things burn. So you don't need to watch your meals as tightly as someone that has less muscle mass, because the calories are going to affect them just a little bit more. So that's an important thing to kind of take into consideration. And then it's also important for a listener to understand that, you're eating for different things. And this ties back into understanding your why. If you say to an athlete, hey, like, you need to eat a certain way, versus someone wanting to lose weight or gain weight or just be overall healthy, those diets will look very different. There might be a lot more things timed around you when you train as an athlete, around when your meals are taken, how frequently you're taking your meals, what your meal before training looks like, versus someone that's just, hey, I want to lose some weight, I want to gain some muscle. You could pretty much just have the right kind of meals throughout the day and get your training session in, and it's not going to affect you that much. So again, it's about understanding your why before you jump into whatever meal plan. And then it's also understanding what is doable for you in your life. And I've always had these conversations with people around things like paleo dieting and keto dieting and stuff. And like, those are all great diets. Each one of them work. Don't get me wrong. But if you can confidently say that you can not eat carbohydrates ever again, and remember, carbohydrates is anything to do with sugars, etc. If that's what you can do and that's sustainable in your life, then 100% go for it. But because you saw a celebrity say that really worked for them, doesn't mean that it's going to work for you. Because if you want to go and have a beer with a mate 2 times a week, then guess what? You can't do keto. If you want to have a pizza once every 2 weeks, guess what? You can't really do keto, because something like keto is about something that you can consistently do that gets your body into a fat-burning state for a long period of time. When you take carbohydrates in, you reset that process. So it's like a building block of success. The longer you're on keto, the more success you start having. The moment you fall off the wagon, it's like, guess what? Let's start building the Lego blocks again from kind of, let's say, 20 steps back. So I just don't believe that any diet that is restrictive is sustainable. I'm of the strong opinion that we are on this earth one time, and we want to live life and enjoy life. And I love pizza. I love sweets and chocolates and all those things, but I love them in moderation for the other stuff that I choose to fill 80 to 85% of my day with. But I don't say I'm never having a pizza again. I'm never having a beer again, because that wouldn't be sustainable for me. And it would also put me in like a corner, which makes me, whenever I restrict something and say I can't have it, I want it more than anything on the planet. So if a diet looks like that, I think you're in the wrong space.
Got you.
nailed
Okay,
it.
so we're
You're
doing something
100% right.
sustainable. We're talking about something sustainable, and what we're saying is there's not one diet for all, and one has to do research what works best for you. But whatever you start with, obviously try and continue, but don't be so inflexible that you can't obviously break out. And as you said, enjoy yourself as well. Guys, let's move on to, and we spoke a bit about this, but I want to talk a bit, just to summarize it for our listeners, and Grant, maybe you can come into this. How training changes in your 20s, 30s, and 40s and beyond. In other words, optimizing your fitness for your age and lifestyle. Is it that you're going to be doing the same thing from 20 through to 60 and you're not going to change it? Or should someone be thinking, okay, let me think, what is my age now in 2025, and should I be adjusting what I'm doing? What's the approach there, Grant?
So for me, I mean, a challenge a lot of people face is that they end up having injuries, so the stuff that they do when they're younger ends up causing them injuries when they're older. You'll find guys that were, say, rugby players and that kind of thing. They've got a lot of impact and damage on their joints and stuff like that, and that ends up dictating what they can do. Obviously, when you're younger as well, you try and push the heavy weights because you're training your ego, not yourself. I'm fortunate. I've got no injuries. I've never really had those problems. But I do see it like across the board for different people. So your objectives change as well. When you're 18 or 19, you want the biggest biceps that you can have. When you're 55, you want to be able to pick up your grandkids and, have fun with them and have energy and that sort of thing. So you definitely can change the way that you train and for what your objectives are. And when you start to go beyond that sort of age, 65, 70, 75, or 80, you need to start thinking about things like balance, because one bad fall can be a devastating event in an older person's life. So stretching, flexibility, mobility, balance, and those kind of things have to play a role as you get older. For me, though, I'm stronger than I've ever been. I'm stronger now at 59 than I was when I was 18 in all the exercises that I do. And that's because I've just been consistently chipping away and continuing and done it consistently. So it hasn't really changed for me, but I definitely see that in people around me. And also what happens is, life gets in the way. So you find people who 18 to 30 years old, they're in great shape, then they have a child. And when they have a child, they're still juggling all the same balls, and they've added an additional ball. And that additional ball is their child. And then they start to give up some of the other stuff. So they give up their hobbies, they give up their sports, and they start to put on weight. So people go through a phase where it's super important for them to stay in shape. They get married, they have a child, they have to drop one of those balls, and generally they drop the ball that is them and their health. They pick up weight and that kind of a thing, and then they have to get back into that sort of a routine. So again, consistency is that, if I could advise somebody, go to the gym or do exercise every single day of your life, and that way you'll never really have to change your routines, because you're building and building and building on what you got. That's not real life, though. So people come in and they circle back to it all the time, and then they have to be concerned about injuries. They have to be concerned about age-specific exercises and that. So definitely, what in most people's life cycle in terms of training, that does change. It definitely does change, everyone.
Yeah. Okay. Mark, you've been in that type of training. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think Grant absolutely nailed it. Like, life ebbs and flows, and it always will. In your 20s, you made up rubber and magic, and you can literally pick up whatever you see and throw it around and get a swat. Then in your 30s, your joints start tightening up a little bit. In your 40s, it's getting harder and harder to get out of bed. But and then in your 50s, you look like Grant, and everything's cool. But really, it's true. It's consistency. And then there's a phrase that I live by, which is motion is lotion. So
Right.
if you do pick up a niggle, it's not an excuse to not train or fall back on your laurels. You can still find a way to move. If you get married and you start having kids, there's still ways you can move. So always finding a way to move to keep that consistency. Look, like we say, you may have been super fit in your 20s. You were lifting, you were getting strong. Life happens. You get a family, your job starts taking over. But it should never be an excuse to not move, because you can walk the dogs, you can push the pram with the kid, you just keep moving. So my perspective is always one of, not always peak performance, because I believe that most people just want to live better. At a peak performance level, like, I'm going to use Mike and Grant because they really are in really good shape. Then that parameter is slightly smaller. Then that consistency is quite a big deal to keep pushing and keep moving. But for the general average person, I think just move and be conscious of moving more throughout whatever phase of your life you're in. Obviously, if you're in your later stages, like your 70s and your 80s, just be very much more careful of how you're moving. But other than that, just keep moving and keep trying to progress. And as always, consistency.
Makes sense, guys. In our last few minutes, I just want to spend, we've been asked a few questions over the last few weeks, and I just want to break a few fitness myths here. So if we can just tackle them. We on to, does does cardio kill muscle gains? I think a lot of guys out there, they're wondering, they wake up in the morning, should I do cardio or should I do muscle? And if I do cardio, will it kill the gains I've made on muscle? What are your guys' thoughts on that? Does anyone want to tackle that?
Sure. I mean, as far as scientific advice, I mean, the short answer is cardio does kill muscle gains because at the end of the day, you need bricks and cements to build a house. And if you start stealing out bricks, then the house won't get built. It's a pretty simple kind of metaphor. And cardio is basically you steal bricks because it's just burning calories. It's essentially what it does. And it's still a calorie hypertrophy within targeted muscle. Now, is it bad? No, of course not. And can I eat up calories to get muscle mass? Yes. But you have to understand that if I don't go through my day and my goals, I want to grow muscle and I'm going to go do 700 calories worth of cardio burning, and I need to put that 700 calories back because otherwise I can't build a house. So it's essentially in itself is that something that kills muscle. But the byproduct of deferred cardio is burning calories, and that essentially can reduce the amount of muscle, or essentially decrease muscle because you might burn into calories that your body has of muscle, and that might cause you to lose muscle.
Yeah. So is the answer to that, well, alternate or do both, or you can't just do one if you want to achieve cardio and muscle gain? Which is
I guess I think it's just kind of chill out. You know, so I want about myself and cardio. And the idea is that cardio should be steady state cardio and not too intense and not kind of the majority of what your training session looks like. If your eyes are of course and I'm not too interested about how much muscle mass I'm holding and I just want to get calories burnt on cardio as a great addition to give it at a high intensity to burn through calories. Such as, weight training you still have muscle growth at the same time while burning calories. So I would say that the opposite goes from the yes. If you have whole body muscle, then cardio is not going to be the front runner activity every day, but it's not bad to do. You have to decide on what kind of cardio you want to do, and I would say that steady state cardio is healthy for cardiovascular state. It's a bad thing to do. And when I say steady state cardio, I'm talking about, you can't train on an incline at a slow pace for a decent amount of time. Go for a stepper, taking a decent walk outside with your dog or a significant other. That's steady state cardio. That's, it's not very easy to do. It's not, you put on a look into it, and that's going to help preserve muscle mass. But when you start to add into intense cardio where you're sprinting and you're doing running long periods of time, then yes, you can burn into muscle.
Someone's got a great, I really love that opinion as well. Hey, thanks, Mark. I think that's a great point. Another myth that we want to break is the truth about supplements. What's worth the money and what's worth the hype? I think that's a show in itself, but at a very high level. Mark, do you want to give a...
Yeah, I'll lead you into it, Mark, because I know that you've got a very good understanding of supplements, but I do think that it is a show all in itself. But, at the end of the day, we could break down creatine, protein. Basically, those are the only two things I think you should be taking. And then, the zinc, magnesium, the ZMAs, the branch chain aminos. I mean, we get spoon-fed all of these things that we don't necessarily need, but which might have a place. But I think that's a show all in itself. But yes, supplementation obviously is a place for...
and I think we should dedicate a show to it. But Mark, at a very high level, what would you say to the listeners?
I'm basically summarize that there are a handful of supplements that are worth your money, and that goes from supplements, as you said, like whey protein and creatine, across to nutraceuticals like omega-3s, zinc, things like that are essential for you to get in that we don't get right enough in our diet. But outside of that, it's a hard conversation. It rises because when you're weighing up the price of what you pay for a lot of these products, a lot of them are just once you spend the money on, you're better suited to go and eat a good meal, spend money on high quality protein sources, high quality vegetables. That's that really is the level. So I think that the answer today is definitely a show itself, because we can break all of those things down for our listeners. But I thought that supplementation, if you want to say, is it worth your money on the overall? I'd actually have to say the answer is yes, based on the time that we live in now, because we don't get everything that we need, and it is a convenience source. But when you go past a few items, it becomes not worth it.
I think it's been a fascinating show, guys. And I think what we've just shown you, there's just so much to talk about that we're going to talk about through the year. And I think probably each one of those points we can certainly go in and unpack. But just to leave our listeners with a key message on strength, recovery, and performance for 2025, just parting messages from each of you guys. Maybe, Grant, we can just start with you, and then we'll go to Mark and Mark. A leaving message for our listeners.
Consistency. Don't stop. Keep it up. That for me is really, really, really the key.
Mark?
Yeah, I think Grant's put start on strength is the most important thing. You make a pact with yourself. Figure out what gets the fire going hard. It's the both of us. I think that being able to take care of yourself is an essential part of who you are as a person. And that doesn't mean that you have to go like that. But I think that you have to yourself as a human being to be able to take care of yourself. And what that looks like is build this version of you. And that comes with discipline. That's making a decision every day to do something that might be uncomfortable at first. So discipline is going to be my takeaway for the year.
Great. So we've got consistency, discipline. Mark, your side?
And then for me is know your foundation. Once you know that foundation, start your building blocks. Then so simplify, educate, and then add in everything that Mark and Grant said about consistency and the discipline. You should be geared for success.
Fantastic insights for our listeners as we segue into 2025. Thanks, guys. That wraps up today's deep dive, right, into building a stronger, healthier body. And I think we've tackled a lot, from ability to nutrition recovery, debunking some myths. And I think we've seen that there's a lot to talk about and a lot of topics which we'll try and unpack through the year. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and share. And join us next time as we discuss another piece of the puzzle. And we're going to call it salt food, talking about what's important for your soul and how we can unpack food and diets. We'll bring in some specialists as well. And we'll also talk about the new injection therapies, Ozempic, Mounjaro, and what that can or can't do for you. I think it's a big topic and a lot of hype around it. And we'll try and unpack it for you as well, and tell you how it can help you in your journey. So look forward to that. Awesome. Look forward to the next episode. And thanks for listening, everyone. And thanks to my guests.
Thanks, guys.
Everybody. Thank you.
Always nice. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks, everybody.
Let's talk.